just like that. You're not even going to hear about this.
And I was heartened a while back when there were some leaks that came out of the Biden administration that he, at like a donor event in San Francisco or something, said basically like, we got to make sure we avoid World War III. I'm paraphrasing, but that was he was like, we got to avoid nuclear war. We got to avoid World War III. And I was like, okay, good. He's thinking about that. That caution that existed at that point seems to be totally out of the window. And if you read, the official sort of like state paper, the New York Times, about the administration's thinking, they're like, well, Russia said this nuclear stuff and it didn't happen. So they must just be bluffing. It must just not be real.
Jesus.
And it's like, okay, number one.
Was there a timeline before they could press the button?
Exactly. And they didn't blow up the whole world yet. So we should be fine.
We're fine.
I mean, that's insane, number one. And number two, the idea that Russia hasn't escalated in response to our actions is just not true. They've been striking critical energy infrastructure, including, in and around Kyiv, which was an escalation. They went through with conscription that was very politically dicey for Putin. There's rumors that they may go through with another draft. So the idea that they just took all of this lying down and didn't escalate is a fantasy to start with. But it's incredibly dangerous and foolish to think just because they didn't push the nuclear button yet that, it's all fine and he's just full of it.
Thank God there's people like you guys out there, because there's so many people that they have Ukraine in the same category of importance and significance as they do climate change. Mm-hmm. Climate change, which is a real thing, but it's a politically divisive alleyway where you're not allowed to veer from the course and even look at any kind of science. It's the same thing with Ukraine. A support for Ukraine is undeniable. You must put it in your Twitter bio. And you guys are saying, you're not saying don't support Ukraine, but you're saying, look where this is going. Do you understand what this is? Because you can't just openly support something you don't understand without a comprehensive view of what the fuck the factors are and how it got to be that way in the first place. And you're not going to hear that in a 5-minute clip on mainstream news. Yes. You're just not going to.
It's so important for us to internalize that message. We're not saying we hate Ukraine. We're not saying we don't even support Ukraine. The Ukrainian cause is just. What we're saying is, what about our interests?
All the
there
factors.
Are interests that supersede Ukraine. If I was Ukrainian, I would do exactly what they were doing. But guess what? Ukraine does not exist without the United States. We provide the vast majority of the military there for the diplomacy perspective. If we cut off military weapons to them tomorrow, that's it. Done. They literally are forced to the negotiating table. I'm not even saying we should do that. I'm saying, what is the end game? And, in my neighborhood, there's more Ukraine flags than there are American flags. It's like Ukraine flag, gay pride flag, no American flag. But then it's like, okay, if you go to those people, and if I would just say what they said, they would say, this is disgusting. This is Russian propaganda. It's up to the Ukrainians for when they want to stop. And I said, yeah, I completely agree. But it's also up to us for whatever we stop providing them weapons. We're like, hey, if you want to defend this part of your territory, that's totally fine. That's our end game. My end game is not having a nuclear conflict, is making sure that we have peace on the European continent. Vladimir Putin is in opposition to that peace. But Putin and Russia are going to exist. Something I think people should take home, too, is you had Peter Zeihan on. He said it really well, which is the first year of every Russian conflict is a total shit show. If you look at Finland, if you look at the first year of Hitler's invasion, even going all the way back to Napoleon and some of the Tsar's campaigns before that, they lose a shit ton of people. It looks like a complete mess. They fire a bunch of generals, all of this. And then what do? They use their vast the Russian Colossus is known of that for a reason, because they have a shitload of people. They have military materiel. They amass it and they throw it at them. And so people are like, Saagar, Krystal, like what you guys are saying will be valid, but Ukraine is winning. Look, we are barely a year into this. 1 year into the First World War, I could make the easy case that Germany was going to win the First World War. Second World War, I could easily make the case the Nazis were going to win. If I go back to Civil War, I could easily make a case the Confederates were going to win. All three of those, it didn't happen. Why? Because these things go on for a long time. Like, you have no idea what it is. And one of the reasons that many of those conflicts, first and two, went on and ultimately came to the conclusion they were, was because millions of lives were lost. And the whole point from those conflicts, if you look at the way that people talked, was we have to learn the lesson. We have to learn the lesson. But it's been 75 years, and now this is all a game. This is a tweet that people are saying about Ukraine, but it says real-world consequences for people.
That's it. That's it exactly. And the total lack of an ability to have a reasoned debate without just being smeared as a propagandist is
Again, don't read the comments.
It is a terrifying moment. And There's a couple things that do give me some heart, which is number one, even though I can't really blame the people who can't understand seeing it another way, because the propaganda that is coming from every network, really almost across the board, is very strong, and it's very hard to avoid that. So I have sympathy for that perspective. But even so, a poll just came out that had, from NBC News, they buried this at the very end of their write-up of the poll, public's now 50-50 split on continuing aid to Ukraine. So people are questioning, even though they're being fed so much propaganda. I think that is a credit to the rise of independent media. I think it's also a credit to the fact that they don't fucking trust the mainstream press anymore.
Both things. But because of independent media, the trust is informed, or the lack of trust, rather, is informed.
It's not just knee-jerk. I hope. I mean, that's my hope looking at those numbers. Yeah.
I think your hope is 100% correct. I think you're right. I think you guys are very important. Glenn Greenwald, very important. Jimmy Dore, very important. Kyle Kalinske, very important. People who are real people that actually have done the homework and are going over the details and can inform people. Because there's so many people out there. I talked to Dave Smith about the history of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I was like, what? And he informed me about the coup in 2014. I'm like, my God.
There's a lot of backstory.
And then we played the video on the Colbert Show, the old Colbert Show. Yeah. Which is just fucking
it's Gideon something, the guy from the Times, where he was like...
He's got a book. He's selling a book. Yeah, that's right. In the book, he's comparing Russia and Ukraine to Batman and Robin. And he's like, Ukraine is Robin, and we want to take Robin and bring him over to our side. And it's like this open secret.
They're just openly talking about it. There were cables that actually WikiLeaks released. And a friend who's a great journalist, Branko Marcetic, who's been looking at the Ukraine conflict with a critical eye. He sorted through these cables, and he found all of these diplomatic cables from the prior era where you had NATO allies, you had U.S. officials who were all saying, hey, guys, Russia has red lines here with regard to Ukraine. And floating NATO membership with Ukraine is a real violation of their hard red lines. And we're very fearful. And they laid out exactly the trajectory that we could find ourselves on. Now, that doesn't deny Russia agency or, Putin and the Kremlin agency for invading. No one made them do that. However, it is to say that, there was a time when you were allowed to acknowledge that U.S. policy could lead to this exact event.